After becoming the mother of the protagonist in a Mary Sue novel, I gained a system. In my arms was a baby still in her swaddling clothes. The system spoke excitedly, "You need to abandon her. Leave her to be raised by that alcoholic and violent father. She will grow up through adversity and, like a resilient wildflower in difficult circumstances, catch the attention of the Chi Corporation's heir. Once they get married, you can return to reconnect and live a wealthy life among the elite." I looked down at the baby who was giggling softly and stayed silent for a moment. What if I don't abandon her? The system paused, seemingly taken aback that anyone would ask such a thing. Soon enough, it spoke again, with a mocking tone. "Then she will just be the most ordinary person. Attend school normally, work a normal job, and fail to catch the CEO's attention." I smiled. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? If all her suffering was just to catch the attention of some man, then maybe not going through those hardships was better, wasn't it? Chapter 1. I kept Mary. No, perhaps now I should call her Melisande Ma. I ignored the system's objections and changed her name from the original plot. Now she carries my last name. I hate how, in those novels, the protagonist is always stuck with the most cliched names, forever unable to escape names like Emily, Anna, or Sophia. I like the name Melisande. It's French, meaning strength and sweetness. Chapter 2. When Melisande turned 7, she started elementary school. She was cheerful and well-liked by her teachers and classmates, until one day, she came home crying. Her carefully braided pigtails had become loose. I asked her what had happened. She choked up. "Colin keeps pulling my braids during class." I knew Colin. He sat behind my daughter. I had seen him during a parent-teacher meeting, a skinny kid who looked rather shrewd. I frowned. "Did you tell the teacher?" Melisande nodded. "I did. But..." She hesitated. "But the teacher said Colin does it because he likes me." I didn't react in front of my daughter. Instead, I gently knelt down and said, "Can you take Mommy to see Miss Mary?" In the office, the teacher with red-framed glasses looked up from her lesson plan. Giving me a teasing smile, she gestured towards my daughter, whom I had seated a bit further away. "Melisande is quite pretty. Many of the boys in class like her. You know, at this age, boys don't know how to express their feelings, so they tease her a bit, pull her braids now and then." She seemed to want to place us in the same category, women who had suffered the same and were supposed to be proud of it. But as I stayed silent, her smile slowly froze. I spoke calmly. "I don't understand. All I know is that my daughter has been bullied. This is school bullying." The teacher seemed startled by the severity of the term. She abruptly put down her thermos. Sitting up straight, "Ms. Melisande's mother, you're being unreasonable. They're just kids. They don't even understand what bullying is. It's just playing around." "Playing around?" I repeated her words. "If it's just playing around, can you move Colin to sit behind your daughter instead?" It was an open secret that Miss Pan's daughter was also in the class. The teacher, who had been so argumentative just moments ago, suddenly froze, and I understood then. She knew it was wrong. She just didn't want to deal with it. Just like so many unspoken rules in society, clearly wrong. But no one stood up to say otherwise for centuries, because breaking them was far more troublesome than following them. Like how a simple "it's just playing around" is much easier than teaching boys to respect girls from a young age. But I was going to break it. For my daughter, and for countless girls whose braids would be pulled in the future. To tell them that this wasn't affection, it was bullying. "Miss Pan," I called her attention back. "You have two choices now. 1. Move Colin to sit behind your daughter. 2. Separate my daughter and Colin, and teach the boys in the class that the right way to show affection is through respect and care, not bullying." The teacher suddenly deflated like a punctured balloon. "I'll choose the second option." Satisfied, I took my daughter's hand and left. As we were leaving, Miss Pan called out, seemingly unwilling to concede, "Melisande's mom, you're being too controlling. It will affect her normal interactions with her classmates." Without turning back, I responded firmly, "That's none of your concern." Back home, I shared my concerns with Melisande. "Sweetheart, if Colin stops playing with you because of what Mommy did today, will you be sad?" Over the years, we had made a pact to always be honest with each other. never bottling up our feelings. Melisande thought for a moment, then timidly asked, "Does that mean Colin won't pull my braids anymore?" I nodded, yes. She immediately rushed over to hug me, her eyes sparkling. Then Mommy is the best mommy in the whole world. Wrapped in her warm, soft embrace, all my worries suddenly disappeared. I thought, this truly was the best compliment in the world. Chapter 3. That night, after my daughter had fallen asleep, the system reappeared. Ever since I had taken it upon myself to keep Melisande, it had rarely shown up. It was, I supposed, a form of silent protest against my actions, but for the sake of completing our mission, it would still appear from time to time to remind me. Like today, host. Our ultimate goal is to make the protagonist's happiness reach 100%. You need to step up your efforts. I suddenly grew curious. According to the original plan, when was her happiness supposed to reach 100%? The system replied, of course, when she marries the Chi Corporation heir. I asked again, and after the wedding, what was her happiness level then? Did you ever check? The system fell silent. I understood then, they had never checked. Like how fairy tales always end with "and the prince and princess lived happily ever after." But what comes next? Would the princess get homesick? Would she remember her carefree days in the forest while learning court etiquette? Would she be troubled by conflicts with her mother-in-law? Would the prince fall in love with someone else one day? All these questions, no one cared. If happiness is so fleeting, it cannot be called true happiness, because something transient cannot sustain a lifetime. I asked again, can you check Melisande's current happiness level? Not out of the ambition of a strategist, but out of a mother's curiosity. Is my daughter happy now? The system disappeared for a moment, probably to check the data. A few seconds later, it returned with a voice almost cracking in disbelief. 54%. How is this possible? This is supposed to be her happiness level after going through hardships and meeting Tom for the first time. Being saved by him. What have you done? I looked down at my sleeping daughter and suddenly smiled. I just did what a mother should do. It turns out that the one who saves the princess doesn't have to be the prince. It can also be the queen, and I believe that, before long, the one who saves the princess will be the princess herself. Chapter 4. A few years later, Melisande started high school. She was an excellent student, especially gifted in the sciences. She was almost always first in her grade in mathematics. But one day, she came home looking dejected, not saying a word. I immediately noticed something was wrong and asked, "Are you unhappy with your midterm results?" Her voice choked up instantly. A new transfer student joined our class, and in their first midterm, they ranked first, including in math. I understood her frustration. Being beaten in the field where one excelled most was certainly not a pleasant feeling. So I asked gently, "How many students are there in your grade?" Melisande thought for a moment and replied, 645. I smiled and said, "See, you're not losing to one person. You're ahead of the other 643. That's already amazing." Hearing my comfort, Melisande's mood finally improved, but there was still a hint of disappointment on her face. "Mom, our math teacher said that girls aren't good at the sciences. Even if I'm good at it now, by senior year, the boys will overtake me." I smiled. Which teacher made such a conclusion? Again, which teacher? Melisande sighed. Our math teacher is also the vice principal. The system gleefully chimed in my head. Oh, this one's not going to be easy. I turned my head, thinking for a while. Sweetheart, do you want to attend a better private school? Private schools are more expensive, but the improvement in educational resources is visible. Most importantly, instead of treating students merely as students, they treat them as clients. So, if someone says something like girls aren't suited for the sciences, I have the leverage to argue back. Unexpectedly, it wasn't Melisande who was the most excited, it was the system. It shrieked in my mind. "No way!" I closed my eyes, exasperated. "Why are you so worked up?" The system hurriedly explained. "That new transfer student is the second male lead. He's especially talented academically and easily gets first place." At first, the protagonist feels crushed, but gradually, she sees him as a role model. and their feelings grow. I was puzzled. So, the system was nearly losing it. Don't you get it? He could be the role model that helps the protagonist move forward. I still spoke with the same puzzled tone. Seeing an opponent as a role model is about my daughter's attitude, not about who the opponent is, right? The system seemed stumped by my response. But, it mumbled for a while, unable to come up with anything coherent. I continued calmly. Letting the protagonist face setbacks to grow is not loving her. In reality, it's just giving the second male lead a chance to shine. It's all about the male character. True love is clearing the path for her, allowing her to step over everyone else and climb higher. The system was silent for a long time before finally muttering weakly. But in all the missions I've received, the story is always like this. The protagonist has to be misunderstood, trapped by villains, endure all kinds of hardships before she can be reborn and truly find happiness. I shook my head and sharply pointed out. Then think again. What about the male leads in these stories? Aren't they always born into wealthy families? And the worst thing they've suffered is a stomachache? The protagonist's happiness always comes from their love. But if they withdraw that love, she would have nothing. I concluded. These stories may be classified as romance for women, but essentially, they are male-centric power fantasies. The system didn't argue anymore. It was completely convinced. After a while, it sighed, but without the second male lead, we lose a chance to increase her happiness. How should we proceed with the plot now? I didn't answer it, because by then, Melisande had made up her mind. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, but she still hesitated. Can we really do it? But private school fees are so expensive. I smiled and patted her head. Of course we can. Mommy has saved some money over the years. You know, all these years, aside from raising my daughter, I had been learning to do business myself. Unlike in the original story, where I would just drift aimlessly and wait for my daughter to marry into a wealthy family so I could become rich overnight. Tears welled up in Melisande's eyes as she hugged me tightly. Thank you, Mommy. I know you're doing this to give me a better environment. Don't worry. I'll study hard and won't let you down. In that moment, I realized my daughter had truly grown up. In the past, I often saw parents who believed in hardship-based education, telling their children how much they had suffered and how much they had sacrificed for them. But why do that? It only adds unnecessary guilt. As long as you treat your child well, they will naturally understand. I opened my arms and hugged Melisande back. Mommy's greatest wish isn't for you to excel academically, but for you to be truly happy. Chapter 5. The transfer procedures went smoothly. Freed from the shadows that once clouded her mind, Melisande became even more determined on her academic journey. I also hired a math tutor for her. She was a female teacher who graduated from a top university's mathematics department. Perhaps currently, in the field of science, there are relatively fewer women reaching the pinnacle. But that doesn't mean girls are inherently unsuitable for learning sciences. On the contrary, it's precisely because there are too many doubting voices along the way that girls become increasingly unsure of themselves. More than just helping her with her studies, I hired this tutor hoping she could serve as a role model, even though there are very few who tread this path. As long as someone has walked it, it means the road is passable. If others can do it, then I believe my daughter can too. Because she is so intelligent and resilient. The day Melisande finished her college entrance exams, my company was officially established. While waiting for her outside the exam hall, I asked the system, "Can you check Melisande's current happiness level?" The system replied, "Hold on." A few seconds later, it shrieked, 76%. I was puzzled. Is that high? The system's voice trembled. Very high. Among all the hosts who started their missions with us, your score is the highest. At that moment, Melisande came bounding out of the exam hall. She grabbed my arm, her smile radiant. "Mom, the exam went so well this time. I'm confident you'll be getting a call from the admissions office of a top university." I smiled and took her bag. "Oh my, looks like I'll be basking in your glory." Melly, in the original story, Mary worked part-time to afford tuition while studying. Even though she worked extremely hard, she couldn't avoid the impact of her circumstances. In the end, she only got into an average university. In this life, I cleared all obstacles for her. allowing her to focus on her studies. She was able to perform to her fullest potential and got into the best university in the country. Her path in life visibly widened. Even if she doesn't marry into a wealthy family in the future, she now has the ability to become successful on her own. The system sighed in my mind. Host. Maybe your choice was right. You've truly changed her life. And you've also changed my perspective. I curled my lips into a faint smile. Saying nothing. Chapter 6. Melisande was accepted into the mathematics department of a top university. She was invited back to her old high school to give a speech. Standing on the stage, full of spirit, she shared her learning experiences and then said, "Finally, I want to tell all the girls here today, if any teacher has ever told you, girls aren't suited for the sciences or boys will surpass you eventually, please don't believe them. I'm standing here today so that whenever you feel like doubting yourself, you can think of me. Think of someone who got into the mathematics department of a top university, and she is a girl." After she finished speaking, the applause was thunderous. I saw a few girls who had been sitting with their heads down, bored, suddenly lift their heads, their eyes bright with hope. I also saw the vice principal, who had once belittled my daughter, looking grim. Beside him, the principal suddenly looked as if he'd had an epiphany. It seemed he finally understood why all his efforts to retain my daughter had failed, why she was so determined to leave. Losing an excellent student who could get into a top university must have filled him with anger. But I no longer cared, nor did I have the energy to find out. After overcoming countless obstacles, the boat has smoothly sailed past the mountains. Chapter 7. After Melisande left for college, I also began focusing on my career. We both worked hard in our respective fields. Some nosy person once advised me, "Why are you working so hard? You have a daughter, not a son. You don't need to buy a house or prepare a dowry for her." I smiled faintly and replied, "If being your daughter is such a miserable fate, then mine is truly blessed. The harder I work now, the less hardship she'll have to endure in the future. Everything I have will be hers, not just a few houses and some dowry money." The person's face changed, and they fell silent. After they left, the system asked me, "Host, I don't understand human emotions very well. Did she say those things because she has a son?" I shook my head. "No. She also has a daughter, an only daughter." The system was puzzled. "Then why would she say something like that? Doesn't she love her daughter?" I was silent for a long time, unsure of how to explain human nature to a machine. Maybe she does, but it's clear that even though she gave birth to a daughter, she still harbors a preference for sons. They believe that having a son means they must work harder, while having a daughter gives them a reason to rest. It's an implicit form of son preference embedded in their mindset, in their hearts. They might even favor the son who never existed over the daughter who does. As a result, they project that affection onto their sons-in-law or nephews. So do they love? Perhaps, but not wholeheartedly. After all, where the money is, the love is, that is the one eternal truth. Chapter 8. 3 months after Melisande started college, my ex-husband showed up at my door. The system informed me that after my daughter got accepted into a prestigious university, our small town had plastered her achievement on public notice boards. Unfortunately, my alcoholic ex-husband happened to see one. He did some digging and discovered that I had started a company and made a decent amount of money. He then went to great lengths to get my contact information to demand money, but I ignored his messages and calls. When he came to my office, the security guards threw him out. When he tried to ambush me on the street, my personal bodyguards subdued him before he could get close. I've worked hard to earn money so I could keep dirty people and their messes far away from me. I smiled as I told him that if he dared to show up again, he wouldn't be dealing with professional bodyguards next time but with the local thugs and a burlap sack. My ex-husband, being the coward he is, quickly nodded and agreed. Not long after, the system informed me that he had gone to my daughter's university to find her. I immediately tensed. Did he do anything outrageous? I feared he might ruin my daughter's future by creating a scene outside the campus gates, confronting her professors, or even blackmailing her publicly. The system reassured me. No, he didn't dare escalate things. Your threat scared him. Instead, he took a more pitiful approach, claiming he was struggling to survive and asking Melisande to get a few thousand yuan from you. I let out a sigh of relief. That's good. The system sounded puzzled. Aren't you worried Melisande might be deceived? After all, you've never mentioned her father to her. She doesn't know he's an alcoholic and abusive. What if she pities him? I tapped my finger on the desk, my expression dark. I trust her to know right from wrong, and even if she gets fooled this time, consider it a life lesson. A few thousand? I can afford that tuition fee. Not long after, Melisande messaged me. She said she needed 30,000 yuan for her school's robotics competition as seed funding. The system sighed in my mind. Looks like she caved in. I said nothing and still transferred the money. Host, why didn't you expose Yan Haoming's lies? And aren't you angry that Melisande lied to you for his sake? I slowly shook my head. I once read a quote, "Love often feels like a debt." Perhaps that best described my feelings at that moment. I wasn't angry at my daughter for lying to me. Instead, I began to reflect on myself. Had I not loved her enough all these years, leaving her to feel sympathy for a father she hadn't seen in over a decade? With that thought, I messaged her. Now that you're in college, participating in activities will cost more. I'll increase your monthly allowance by 2,000 yuan. If you need anything else, let me know. Don't hold back on yourself. Her reply was sweet and simple. Thanks, Mom. Love you. Moo-ah. Chapter 9. A month later, I received a package addressed to Melisande. That evening, my daughter called me excitedly. Mom, did you see the package? Open it. I hesitated. What is it? It's your stuff. I shouldn't open it. Maybe you should wait until you're home for break. I specifically had it sent to our house so you could open it yourself. Hearing that, I relented. But when I opened it, I was stunned by what I saw. Inside was a certificate with bold letters reading Gold Medal Robotics Competition emblazoned on its cover. On the phone, Melisande gloated. Aren't I amazing? Our team's project even got a patent. Some big companies are already inquiring. We might sell it for millions. That 30,000 yuan will definitely pay off. I was too shocked to respond. She actually used the money for the competition? Mom, are you listening? Melisande's voice snapped me out of my daze. I quickly replied, sorry. I zoned out. You're incredible. I'm so proud of you. She giggled but then hesitated. Actually, there's something else. I held my breath. A while back, my dad came to see me. I took a deep breath. He asked me for money, but I ignored him. I wasn't sure whether to tell you because I didn't want you to soften toward him. But then I thought, you have a right to know. After all, he was your husband once. Whether you choose to help him or not, I'll support you. Melisande finished and nervously waited for my response, like a friend worried about their love-struck bestie making a bad decision. Though I hated to admit it, her words brought tears to my eyes. I'd always thought that being a parent meant giving everything. But in that moment, I realized the seeds I'd sown had borne fruit. As her mother, I was now being cared for, understood, and supported by her. My Melly had truly grown into a strong, thriving bamboo. I sniffled softly, not wanting her to notice my emotions. I understand. I won't give him money. And I definitely won't reconcile with him. Don't worry. Hearing that, Melisande seemed relieved. I knew it! My mom is the smartest and most rational mom ever. After we hung up, the system finally spoke up. Host, Melisande's happiness index has increased by another 5%. It's now at 81%. The tears I had managed to hold back fell again. My daughter was happy because I had escaped my suffering. My happiness had become part of hers. Chapter 10. In Melisande's sophomore year, the system suddenly alerted me. Host, Melisande has met Tom. I was surprised. I've already changed her life trajectory. How did they still cross paths? The system explained. In the original story, the heroine met the male lead while working part-time at a cafe. Now, they're schoolmates and met during the freshman welcome party. I couldn't help but sigh. Fate is like an unpredictable rainstorm. Those without umbrellas can't escape it, while those hoping to get drenched never find it. 3 months later, during a routine video call where Melisande updated me on her life, I noticed her voice suddenly become shy. Mom, I think I might be falling in love. A name immediately came to mind, but I feigned ignorance and asked, who is it? A classmate? Melisande nodded bashfully. He's a finance major. We met at the welcome party. He's been pursuing me for a while, and I think he's really kind and considerate. What's his name? Tom. Maintaining my composure, I smiled warmly. That's wonderful. Relationships during college can be beautiful. You're a grown-up now, so I won't interfere with your love life. Just remember to protect yourself. Melisande grinned sweetly. I know, Mom. After ending the call, the system asked in confusion, Host, why didn't you stop them before they could get together? I answered with a question. Why would I stop them? The system sounded even more perplexed. You worked so hard to change Melisande's life. If she ends up marrying Tom and fulfills the original story's ending, wouldn't all your efforts have been for nothing? I chuckled and shook my head. You're mistaken. All my efforts to raise Melisande were to give her more choices. If I interfered with her decisions just to achieve my own goals, how would I be any different from those parents who tear up their child's college acceptance letter to keep them close? Melisande's life is hers to decide. My only role is to support her choices. From the beginning, I only wanted my daughter to be happy. That's all. Chapter 11. It wasn't long before Melisande and Tom officially started dating. She even brought him to meet me. Tom was every bit the male lead described in the original story. Handsome, tall, and polite in his speech. By that time, the Chi family had become a well-known financial powerhouse. Tom was also a standout figure on campus. Naturally, their relationship attracted a lot of attention. I didn't say much, but I did increase Melisande's monthly allowance again. I also reminded her, no matter how wealthy his family is, now that you're in a relationship, you're equals. Don't undervalue yourself, and don't feel entitled to rely solely on his efforts. I rarely brought up the topic of relationships with Melisande. Her bright-eyed surprise was evident as she nodded obediently. Seeing her expression, I once again felt relieved that I hadn't chosen to separate them, regardless of how things ended. At least at this moment, I could tell they genuinely loved each other. Sometimes, that's enough. Love is, after all, a fragile thing with an expiry date. A rare moment of true sincerity is worth cherishing, no matter how brief. Perhaps it was the destined pull of the male and female leads, or maybe it was the enduring nature of first love and the bloom of youth. Whatever the case, their relationship lasted far longer than I had expected. They stayed together all the way through college. When Tom inevitably returned to his family to inherit the family business after graduation, Melisande excitedly told me about the many job offers she had received. She also said, Mom, Tom offered to arrange a position for me in their family business. But I turned him down. I feel it would be too passive. I'd rather make my own way. I nodded, smiling with pride. You made the right choice. There are no true shortcuts in this world. Every so-called shortcut is just a detour to disaster. And this truth is especially evident in relationships. Chapter 12. Melisande ultimately chose a high-paying private company. Though the work was demanding, she was always full of energy and enthusiasm. Around the same time, my company launched a charity project in collaboration with rural towns, promoting local agricultural products while also focusing on women's and children's health. Melisande was intrigued and took some annual leave to join me on the trip. We traveled by plane, then by train, followed by a long bus ride, and finally, a bumpy journey on a pedal tricycle before reaching our destination. When we arrived, we were stunned by the sight before us. A remote village with dusty, unpaved roads stretched out in front of us. It felt like a scene straight out of a literature textbook, quaint, picturesque, but starkly real. That long and winding road seemed to separate the village from 30 years of outside development. The project coordinator explained, the path you just took into the mountains? That's the same one our kids walk every day to get to school. Except, they don't have a tricycle, they have to walk. Melisande froze and instinctively asked, Walk? Walk where? The coordinator replied, To school. Of course. I was at a loss for words. How long does it take them? He held up 4 fingers. 4 hours. They have to leave by 3 in the morning, every day. For a moment, my entire team fell silent, sensing the heaviness in the air. The coordinator quickly rubbed his hands together and added with a chuckle, But hey, now that you're here, we can sell more of our products. Who knows? Maybe we can save up enough to build a new school for the kids. I snapped out of my complicated thoughts and called out to my team. Yes. Let's sell as much as we can. Leo. Set up the equipment and adjust the lighting. We stayed in the small village of Xianya for 3 days. The villagers gave us the cleanest and best-kept house to stay in. On the last night, Melisande and I shared a narrow bed. Neither of us could fall asleep for a long time. Suddenly, I heard her whisper, "Mom, I visited the school today. It really is so far away. I walked the entire 4-hour route. It's unbelievably far. And the school is so run down. The desks and chairs look like they're from the 20th century. I sighed deeply. Then, after a moment of thought, said, "When we leave, let's leave our equipment behind. We can teach them how to live stream and sell their products online. It might help them a little." Melisande nodded in the dark but said nothing. After a while, she murmured, "Mom, how long do you think it would take a place like this to produce a student who gets into a top university? Do you think anyone here dreams of studying math like I did?" I was taken aback. I know my daughter too well. I instantly guessed what she was thinking. Sure enough, the next moment, she sat up and turned to me with a resolute expression. "Mom, I want to stay here." "No!" I refused immediately, without even thinking. It was the first time I'd ever so vehemently opposed one of Melisande's decisions. Perhaps her decision was noble, even right. But at that moment, I didn't care. I couldn't let her suffer here. Melisande's gaze was more determined than I'd ever seen it. "Mom, I've made up my mind. All these years, I've grown up under your protection. You've been the best teacher I've ever had. Now that I'm grown, it's my turn to protect others." In the quiet countryside night, there were no neon lights. Only the moonlight shone through the window, illuminating her firm, glowing eyes. The system notified me Melisande's happiness index had reached 100%. The mission was complete. It should have been a moment of triumph, but all I felt was a deafening silence. I didn't say anything. I simply turned over, facing away from her, and cried through the night. Chapter 13. Melisande used her savings to build a Hope primary school. She quit her high-paying corporate job. She also refused to let me help financially. Her smile was gentle yet powerful. "Please trust me, Mom. I can handle everything on my own." I found myself unable to argue. Tom initially supported her wholeheartedly, but his family wasn't as accepting. His grandfather, the patriarch of the Chi family, was particularly conservative and old-fashioned. He believed a woman should retire from the workforce after marriage to focus on her family. The system noted that in the original story, Mary had resigned after marriage and severed almost all ties with her past friends. From that point on, she lived solely for Tom and the Chi family. Tom pleaded with his grandfather for a long time and finally convinced him to support Melisande's teaching work. However, the old man set a firm condition: they must marry before she turned 30. Melisande refused. Her tears fell freely as she spoke, but her voice was unwavering. "The school has just been built. We've only just hired the first group of teachers. I still have so much to do. There's no way I can settle down before 30. Tom's eyes reddened as he pleaded. "We could just register the marriage to satisfy him. That's all." Melisande lowered her gaze and remained silent for a long time before finally shaking her head. "I will devote all my time and energy to this project. I won't have time for a family. It wouldn't be fair to you. I can't hold you back." For the first time, I saw a man cry so miserably. Even the system sighed. I never thought the obstacle between the male and female leads would turn out to be charity work. I shook my head, saying nothing. As a bystander, there was nothing I could add. Chapter 14. Melisande spent 5 years stationed in the countryside to complete the first Hope primary school. She raised funds through corporate sponsorships, online crowdfunding, and selling agricultural products. One school after another was built. The media began to cover her story. They shared how a top university graduate chose to become a headmistress in rural areas. She was named one of the top 10 most inspiring figures. Her story splashed across front pages. Meanwhile, a small corner of the finance section announced another headline: Chi family heir Tom marries heiress of rival conglomerate. When Melisande saw it, her expression didn't change much. She simply smiled and said, "That's good. We both got what we wanted." Then she picked up her math textbook and headed to the classroom. For the next 40 years, She devoted herself to charity work and remained unmarried. On the day of my passing, Melisande stayed by my side. As my vision blurred, I held her hand, tears streaming uncontrollably. My daughter, now with streaks of white in her hair. The tiny hands I remembered were now rougher than mine. Melisande wiped her eyes, softly sobbing. "I've failed to care for you properly all these years. I'm an unfilial daughter." I shook my head, whispering through the oxygen mask. "You've always been my greatest pride." Her eyes glistened as she leaned down to embrace me. "Just like when she was 7 and ran to hug me," she whispered. "And you've always been the best mom in the world." Before I closed my eyes, I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It was, I thought, the greatest compliment in the world.